At number 10, spicy defense. Usually when you think about wars from ancient times, you think of swords, spears, bows, and arrows as being the primary weapons used to fight, but that wasn't entirely the case with the ancient Greeks. It turns out that their warfare was a lot more advanced than you'd think. The ancient Greeks were actually known to have used chemical warfare as part of their defense. They were known to use poison-tipped arrows and incendiary weapons. The earliest example of such a thing in ancient Greece comes from the siege of Plataea in 429 BC, when Spartan soldiers set fire to a wood pile with sulfur, releasing sulfur dioxide gas into the air and forcing the opposing force to flee their positions. According to other accounts, they may have also poisoned the water supply. The most famous case of chemical warfare from the Greeks, however, comes from the Byzantine Greeks when they invented a petroleum-based substance that couldn't be extinguished with water and would be fired from tubes that were attached to Greek ships. What's so cool about that is the fact that no one has ever been able to recreate it. At number 9, hashtag roasted. I'm sure you've no doubt heard of the messed up punishment devices that have been used throughout history. I have to say that the people of the past were very creative when it came to coming up with ways to bring harm to others, and the ancient Greeks were no exception. I mean, they certainly weren't the worst when it came to their punishments, but they still were going a little overboard. One of their famously horrific torture devices was called the brazen bull. It was a large hollow casting of a bull made from bronze that had a door installed into the side of it. When someone was up for punishment via the brazen bull, they would be stuffed inside the statue, the door would be closed on them, and a fire would be lit under the bull, heating the metal statue. The person inside would then be sadly roasted alive. I would much rather be roasted on Twitter than inside this mighty metal bull, that's for sure. Before we carry on talking about the messed up things that went on in ancient Greece, why not take a moment to leave a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this one. At number 8, questionable relationships. The ancient Greeks had some pretty questionable habits when it came to the coming of age of young Greeks. The idea of a relationship between an older person and one who has not yet come of age was not only normal, but was encouraged. As part of the coming of age of young Greek boys, they would be part of a ritualistic kidnapping. Now don't worry, they weren't actually being taken from their beds in the middle of the night. This was more so an agreement made by the boy's father ahead of time, but either way, they would still be taken by an older person from the community, where they would be taken out into the wilderness and taught how to hunt, they would feast, and they would learn how to be an adult. They would later return to the community, where they would be given a choice of either severing ties with their adult partner or continuing their relationship with them. It's certainly a little unsettling, the fact that this kind of thing was normal. At number 7, backwards logic. It was tough being a woman in ancient Greece. I mean, it's been tough being a woman at any time throughout history, and we're still fighting for our place in society on many fronts, but back in the times of ancient Greece, they had it really bad. Part of Greek society included the notion that women were objects, and as a result, the Greeks saw adultery as a worse crime than non-consensual relations. Now you're probably scratching your head thinking, why? And my dear viewer, I will tell you why they had this sort of backwards logic. You see, since women were considered to be objects and property, any kind of misconduct or mistreatment to a woman, especially one's spouse, this was considered to be almost like theft of this object, and so if found guilty, the person responsible for this injustice would be tried for adultery, not the real crime at hand, being the mistreatment of a woman. The punishment for an adulterer was quite severe, as when caught, they could risk being killed on the spot, and in the event of whatever affair, that would be grounds for an immediate divorce. At number 6, deformed males. Further on the topic of the presence of women in ancient Greek society, let's talk about how women were seen in their communities. Now, even though Aristotle was considered to be one of the greatest philosophers in history, his ideas were also quite flawed. During his life, he believed that women were deformed males who were created when, quote, something went wrong in their mother's wombs. Unquote. They considered women to be so terrible that the philosopher Plato also warned men against being reincarnated as a woman in the next life, saying that this could be avoided if they had lots of success during their current lifetime. Because of this view on women, baby girls were often abandoned, girls' education focused primarily on how to have and raise a family, and when girls were married off, they were considered to be property, like I mentioned in the previous number.
Number 5 is the dirty gal. And sadly, it is so not in a fun way, rather the opposite. For some wild reason, the Greeks believed women had a really unique susceptibility to the things deemed impure. This is everything gross you could think of. So pus, feces, discharges and secretions, animal dung, rotten foods, the whole shebang. These things affected women in a way they did not affect men. Sure, it didn't mean she was more easily grossed out by it, but it also must mean that it's better for her. So naturally, literal filth became part of the treatments for ladies. One awful example is how a woman suffering from a discharge could be prescribed to drink roasted mule dung mixed with hot wine. If you lost your baby amidst that tragedy, they'd be rubbing cow dung all over you. If you've seen some of our medieval videos, you may have heard about the whole wandering womb concept of the olden times, where people believe that a womb could just wander around inside a woman's body or just vacate it entirely as if it's got little legs. Well, anyways, the whole reason for the cow dung thing is they believe that the womb would be so disgusted by the smell of dung that it would run away and relieve her of the trauma. And so the tradition for terrible, filthy medicine for the women of Greece carried on for centuries. Number 4 is another questionable medical tradition: plan sneeze. So this is the fault of one dude specifically. Unlike Estrastratus, he didn't get his name banned forever, however. So Greek physician Sonaris was one of the best women's physicians you could find. No concept of how a woman's body worked and full confidence that he did. Perfect combo. He pitched that if women didn't want to get pregnant after, doing it, they should squat, sneeze, and rinse, and just like that, you're pregnancy immune. Well, word spread of this method that allowed people to avoid weird olden contraceptives and not get preggers, so tons of people did it and tons of people got pregnant. Unfortunately, word of it not working did not spread as fast as the rumor that it did, and this tactic carried on in many regions of Greece for decades. Don't worry, Sonaris had a couple backup ideas. He also suggested rubbing honey or cedar resin on your hoo-ha before getting down, which was probably entirely too efficient between the mess and the burning sensation, making people just call it quits on the act altogether for a while. Number 3 is before he cheats. Hold off on the baseball bat and the keys, Carrie. The Greeks got this one covered. Infidelity was a huge no-no and was even classified as a crime in ancient Greek customs. This went on for both men and women. If you were to be called before the courts and found guilty of this act, there were a few punishments, none of which maimed or ended your life. No. They were quite unique. One of the most common was to insert peeled ginger root into the genital orifice of a man or a woman. This would cause intolerable burning sensation and pain to the intimate parts of the unfaithful. Another one was to have the pubic hair on your derriere burnt off with smoldering ash, which sounds just... another option was a radish that had small holes in it pushed in your back door, which would be very itchy and very burny. Yeah, suffice to say, cheating on your partner back then wouldn't result in getting your stuff tossed out on the front lawn or your PS5 drowned, more so in a seriously ingrained lesson on commitment via vegetable. Number 2 is the Phallic Festival. Huzzah! The time has come for us all to gather in the Acropolis and gaze down on the wondrous sight of if you're a visitor, sure, your reaction may be one of shock, but to the people of Athens, this tradition was highly cultivated and something people looked forward to year-round. Once a year, their roads would come alive with all kinds of depictions and representations of male genitalia. This happened during the annual Dionysus celebration, a god of pleasure and wine, where men and women would march down the streets holding giant phalli proudly above their heads as a tribute to their gods, all while drunk out of their minds and on their way in a phallic procession to the temple of Dionysus. According to Aristotle, phallic processions were the birthplace of comedic theater. He claimed that people adapted the jokes they'd yell during the parade processions into full stage plays. So if Aristotle's right, all comedy began with the Greeks carrying giant cartoony dongs. And it's number 1. The axe did it. Projection, everyone's favorite guilt relief. This fable begins when the Athenians sacrificed foods and vegetables to the gods, not animals. Ironically, this is how they start. An altar for Zeus had been set up holding grains and cakes as a sacrifice, and when a wandering ox came across the altar, it trampled much of it and ate the sacrificial food. Well, like I previously mentioned, their gods were very real to them, and a man named Thalon, in anger, then killed the ox with an axe. Thalon was the first Athenian in the city to have killed an ox, and he fled, leaving the axe behind at the crime scene. The witnesses to the scene were shocked by the event and moved to prosecute Thalon for the murder of the ox. Despite his absence, they held a trial to charge Thalon, but it still didn't resolve the sense of communal responsibility for the murder of an ox going on without justice. An oracle spoke up, telling the Athenians they should eat the ox in a feast and repeat the sacrifice every year to compensate. So the next year, a group of ox were to be led to the original altar. Whatever one ate from the altar, that was the one to be killed. He was struck with an axe and then killed by the... a member of the Athelonian family, who would then throw the axe down and run away just like their ancestor. The other participants in the ritual then butchered and skinned the animal with a sacrificial knife and feasted on the meat. This could not be the end of the ritual, however, because a crime had been committed. The ox had been slain, just like before, so it's back to square one with another trial. Since the ox slayer had to flee, the girls who brought the water for sharpening the weapon were charged. Their defense was that those who actually sharpened the axe and knife were more responsible. The sharpeners in turn charged the man who gave them the axe and knife, and then that guy, he charged the butcher. But the butcher claimed the knife was more guilty because it did the cutting, and since the knife could say nothing in its defense, it was found guilty. And then the knife was banished by being thrown into the sea. To conclude this bizarre ritual, back on Acropolis, the skin of the ox was stuffed, stood up, and harnessed to a plow, restoring it to its pre-sacrificial condition. And so they did this every year for centuries. The end. You've heard it before because it literally affects everything, but being a woman is up first. Likely as a result of the whole Pandora's box fiasco, wherein the first human, Pandora, is gifted a jar by Zeus on her wedding night, and he doesn't tell her, hey, don't open that. There's a bunch of demons in there that will, plague mankind. Pandora pops open her wedding gift, and just like that, Greek sexism is born. Distrust of women was embedded in the ancient Greek collective psyche pretty much from the start. Gender classicist Jaron Auckland describes the Greek opinion of a woman eloquently. Irresistibly beautiful, but parasitic and lazy artifact that sits in the house of a man and eats everything. This sexism floated across the realities of civic life, where women were unable to vote, own land, or inherit property. Females were often abandoned at birth, and girls' education focused more on preparation for child rearing than intellectual stimulation. Medical was laughable, and if a woman had an ailment, she was always to blame for it. Aristotle believed and insisted that women were deformed males, created after something went wrong in the mother's womb. Hilarious, because we now know that's actually quite the reverse, and that the male sex develops after the females. Plato warned men not to turn into women when they reincarnated, best done by finding success in their incumbent lives. And even Pericles said that the best thing about a woman was that she was never spoken about. The life expectancy for an ancient Greece woman was 36, and the average for a man was 45. Currently, the life expectancy for Greek women is 82 and for men 77, so being a hater sucks the life out of you boys. And while we ride this wave, let's talk about how adultery is worse. Worse than what? Well, literally everything to the Greek. Even worse than being taken against your will, as the Greeks didn't consider that an act of violence against a person rather than property, which is what women were to their husband or father. For that crime, you'd be fined with literal property damage. Adultery? Whoa, as a woman, you'd best bet was to gouge your eyes out so you never see someone hot and feel temptation ever again once that proverbial ring is on your finger. The Greek definition of adultery includes not only engaging with someone outside of your marriage, but also just being an unmarried woman who does the dirty and gets caught. Adultery was seen as a devastating impact on a family unit, which was a vital institute of Greek society. It undermined a household and therefore society. And if you can just undermine your whole empire for some nookie, it makes sense to the Greeks that adulterers could be killed on the spot if they're caught. Not too far of a stretch. If the caught pair contained a married woman, she was immediately and legally divorced from her husband, even if the victim husband wished to stay with her. He could also sell her into slavery if he felt like it. So while you decide what to do with her, remember you can't smoke him, but you can go get like 20 years of pent out anger out on the guy your wife swept with, because now it's your legal right to punish him with radishes. And you can only imagine where the radishes are supposed to go. And on the topic of law in ancient Greece, justice equals personal outrage. We all piss each other off. It happens. People can be abrasive, or they may have rivaling opinions, or sometimes you just talk too fast, and that's what it takes. Regardless of what you do wrong, people will deal with it and move on. If a law gets involved and is broken, there's an appropriate punishment and recourse via court, which is cordial and doesn't involve two people screaming at each other in front of a judge. But that is exactly what court justice looked like in Athens. According to punishment laws, rage was the heart of why someone was punished by society, meaning anyone could bring anything as a charge against someone else. On a hilarious note, that means about 96% of the surviving court documents from Athens features cases which revolved around how much one person just hated another and was trying to convince the court to hate that person too. Laws defined just how much anger was appropriate response for certain actions, and once parties were in court, it was the prosecutor's job to make the jury feel just as angry about something so that punishment could be handed out. And that led to sort of an eye for an eye system, quite literally. So if you were unlikable in ancient Greece, best thing to do was stick to yourself. But I mean, we shouldn't be too hard on them for letting emotion bias their laws, right? Except for the fact that it happened more than once. Next up, people aren't perfect. Democracy was developed by the many ancient indigenous colonies that are found around the world, and its influence grew through history and societies. The Greeks adopted the practice of democracy, and they executed it in a way that makes them famous in history. However, even a system as revered as democracy can find itself utilized for more nefarious purposes. Best example, the Mytilenean debate of 427 BC during the Peloponnesian War, when a city-state of Mytilene had attempted to separate from the Athenian Empire. The revolt failed epically, however, and the Mytileans were forced to awkwardly submit to Athens again, like a Quebec-Canada scenario. So it's up to the Athenians to decide what punitive measures to take to really teach these guys and make an example of them. According to Thucydides, it was in the fury of the moment that they decided to execute not only the prisoners they'd taken to Athens, but also the entire adult male population of Mytilene, and then the women and the children would be taken into servitude. They send a boat off with these orders, but as they're watching it float away over the horizon, they maybe have it click in that their decision to pretty much burn an entire city to the ground might have been made in haste. So since they've got so much time on their hands, they issued another debate on the subject just to be sure. A new vote was taken, and it was decided that only the prime movers in the rebellion, 1,000 people, would be killed instead of 100,000 people. A second ship is sent off to catch the first and reach them at Mytilene itself just seconds before the sentence is carried out. So, democracy, pros and cons. Another reason to hate living here aside from biased politics is that medical kills, because it wasn't until the 5th century BC that Greek physicians started looking at illness as something based in science. Before, the state of the human body was at the whim of the gods. So what that meant for a patient pre-science medicine is you'd visit shrines and temples and participate in rituals called temple sleep and incubation, wherein you slept at the temple, told the priest your dreams in the morning, and he'd either deem you cured or recommend you just do this again. And yeah, if you die, I guess. I don't know. Then, when science medicine came along, you needed 0 certification to advertise being a physician. Quite simply, medicine in ancient Greece was based around the idea that the human body was composed of a range of fluids. A good doctor was supposed to know each of these separate fluids, what they looked like and what they tasted like, and that's it. Feel sick? Yak in a cup, let your doctor take a swig, and he'll tell you what he thinks is up. Hippocrates said healthy urine should taste like fig juice. One less juice I am now going to try and lice. Unsurprisingly, treatments were just as disgusting as these ancient methods of diagnostics. In most cases, a doctor would prescribe a session of bloodletting to drain the body of bad blood, and anything wrong with a woman could be solved with meal dung mixed into wine. Yum. But their methods certainly might have been disgusting. Written histories from the time often make mention of people living beyond the age of 100, so maybe they were onto something.
Number 5, flaying. This is straight up a crime, man. I don't care what you say. This is just a crime against humanity. I'm not here debating on how governments get rid of their, let's say, more interesting members of society, but this is not it. Popular in the ancient world for whatever reason, and I can't stress this enough, I would faint from watching. I was shivering writing this, seriously, it's the worst. This is the act where someone is skinned alive. They're held down and peeled back like a potato. There's multiple famous incidents like in art and mythology. I just don't know who sits there and one day and goes, you know what, this guy? Yeah, we gotta skin this guy. Let's just skin him. Let's cut him up. Let's go. Number 4, the eagle dropping turtle. Okay, here we are. Top of the food chain. We're in charge. I'd like to make the argument it's not the things we eat that puts us there, but it's the things we don't eat. Think of all the animals at your favorite local Chinese buffet. Well, we as humans have adapted so much that we can survive and choose not to be carnivores or eat certain animals. Where am I going with this? Well, despite us being number 1, sometimes the animal kingdom fights back. That's kind of how it works. Take Aeschylus in 455 BC, for example, a philosopher who found himself being struck by an eagle dropping a turtle onto his head. Unfortunately, the injury was fatal. Since we're talking about Greeks and philosophy, let's bring in a little law here. This is good, you'll like this. Mens rea, actus rea. While the eagle certainly didn't know he was committing a crime, he still did do it. Sounds like someone needs to go to animal court. That's something they would probably do back then. I mean, they did in medieval times. They put animals on court, so why not back then? Number 3, Draco. No, not Malfoy. Not Draco Malfoy. I know you're all thinking it. That's what I thought too. Draco, the lawgiver of ancient Greece, was a man with modern solutions for their modern problems. He was asked to give a code of law to replace the very aged tribal feuding laws that still existed at the time. Commoners were shocked to find out that even trivial crimes could wind you up in the brazen bull, or not breathing anymore. Uh-oh. However, the wealthy, of course, loved these laws and applauded Draco. Classic villain story. They really loved it, so much so that it was Draco's undoing. As the legend goes, Draco was buried in a small mountain of clothes, hats, and garments. He suffocated under the pile of compliments. The accidental fatality of the man who gave us strict laws that are fatal. So what do you charge? You get in trouble for undoing the guy that's supposed to undo? That's weird. I don't know. Number 2, Prometheus. Oh, mighty Prometheus, what wise knowledge of fire do you bring us today? The story of Prometheus is that of a very dark and tragic one. He was the god who gave humans fire, despite Zeus's wishes not to. Well, given Zeus's temper, he wasn't too pleased when he saw people grilling up their Slovaki. Love me some Slovaki, man. Naturally, Prometheus had to pay, so Zeus did something so awful to him, well, we still talk about it today. He had Prometheus chained to a rock where every day at the same time a large bird would come down and eat his innards, just come and just nom nom on his insides. Gross. Since he was a god, he had Wolverine-like healing abilities, but he wasn't immune to pain. It would still hurt. He'd heal every day, but it would hurt really, really bad. Number 1, Sisyphus. I think this one is relatable to everyone, including myself. Unless, of course, a large bird does rip your guts out from time to time, or you've been skinned alive, then that one's more relatable. I doubt that, though. Sisyphus was the king of Corinth and had cheated his meeting with the Grim Reaper one too many times. This made Zeus mad. So he sent in Sisyphus to push a boulder up a mountain forever. Every time he gets to the top, it just falls back down. And if that's not a metaphor for life, I don't know what is. Number 10, stone toilet paper. It's been said that only 2 things in life are certain: not living and taxes. However, I think a third point needs to be added, and that's everybody goes number 2. It's a part of life. You eat, your body takes in its nutrients, and then it gets rid of the waste. That's the cycle of life. It's kind of beautiful, actually. Then we all have to use an invention that I know we're all thankful for: toilet paper. But have you ever wondered what people of ancient times did? I know I do. After all, there was no Walmartius to purchase Greco Papyrus Rolleus, or the Greek staple that is olive oil. Trust me, that'll come into play later. Well, the answer, my friend, is very simple. Even simpler than the 3 seashells, and everybody knows how to use them. Cleansing stones. Yes, that's right. Smooth, rounded stones, just for the occasion. My mom always joked around about using newspapers like some folks did in the old days, but stones, they actually use stones to do that part. A little too rough for my Gerber baby bottom, if you will. No thank you. No. Mom, I was a Gerber baby. Number 9, painted statues. When you close your eyes and think of ancient Greece, what do you imagine? Oh yes, I'm just imagining it right now. Beautiful coastline cities with harbors bustling full of ships carrying fresh fish and cargo, men and women flocking the brick streets and markets. White marble monuments surround the city like clouds of opulence, and the statues of pure white marble depicting Greek gods and myths of yonder. Sounds great, right? Well, what if I told you that not all these beautiful white statues that you could see in museums were pure white marble as we know them today? Yes, that's right. Greek marble statues had color. They were painted with the best and brightest colors they had at the time. It's only with time that the color has faded. Some people want to repaint only after a few short years. Try a couple thousand. Number 8, beef up. Gotta get the gains, gotta get swole so your Discord crush will send you the heart emojis and oohs that you so desire. I'm sorry, that's so cringe, I'm so sorry. At least that's how I'm told romance works these days. Romance might have changed, but working out has not. The ancient Greeks worked out to maintain a peak athletic performance. That's right, brother. However, it wasn't exactly treadmills and pumping iron. One Greek athlete's training involved carrying a cow calf around all day until the calf reached adulthood. Pretty cool. This is all done naked, by the way, though, and slathered in olive oil. Not so cool. Athletes also ate their fair share to keep up with all the working out they did. Some cases up to 10 pounds of meat and bread a day. Talk about beefy boys. That's right, brother. Number 7, one night sneeze. We've all been there. It was a hot summer night. You went out with a couple of friends for girls' night. Didn't Tonight is all about the ladies. No guys, you say to each other. And now you're in the club and drinks are flowing. And that's when you see him. He's tall, handsome, and has blue eyes. You're smitten. Hours later, you find yourself under the sheets up to the neck like it's a primetime sitcom. The sun peers its way through curtains that haven't been cleaned since he bought them. And yes, that's right. That's a one-night stand. They happen, and sometimes people just want to have a little fun. Can you blame them? I can't. What I'm getting at is sometimes nights like those can have an 18-year investment after a 9-month down payment, if you catch my drift. The ancient Greeks had a simple solution for ladies who weren't interested in that kind of bargain. Sneeze. Yes, sneeze. Achoo! Sneeze. Sneeze away the night of Cinco de Mayo tequila shots at a bar called O'Grady's. The Greeks believed if you sneezed a whole bunch, you couldn't get preggers. Simple. Just simple. All you can do is sneeze, dude. Simple. Number 6. Tasteful doctor. As humans today, we have a lot of knowledge in the medical field, and we're only getting smarter. Who knows what we'll be capable of in 100 years? Kind of amazing to think about. Well, despite the technology that the Greeks did not possess, any college professor today will tell you that they were not stupid. They weren't. We owe a lot to them. Part of that is in the medical field. For example, urine tests. A lot can be told about a person from their urine. The Greeks knew this, but they didn't have all that fancy schmancy machines to tell them what was in their urine. Instead, they did the next best thing and tasted the forbidden lemonade in order to determine what was wrong with the patient. Sure, you can tell a lot by that way too, but if the person was sick, well, you know how that goes. Let's keep the lemonade in the cups, please. Yes, I believe. Yes, you have something wrong with your liver.
Let's get dreamy again and disassociate while staring at some of Greece's most beautiful sculpture and stonework. Ah, beautiful. I can't believe statues like these used to be painted to look like Ronald McDonald. Wish I was kidding. Look at that. Met exhibit brings back color to ancient statues. We'll take it back off. It looks terrible. Anyways, as I'm sure you can tell from that sculpture you just saw, Greece from 800 to 300 BCE took heavy inspiration from Egyptian and Eastern monumental art, and over centuries evolved it into the uniquely Greek vision. Greek artists reached a peak of excellence which captured the human form in a way that had never been seen, particularly concerned with proportion, poise, detail, and the idealized perfection of the human body. Their figures in stone and bronze have become some of the most recognizable pieces of art ever produced. Greek architects provided some of the most distinctive buildings in the ancient world, some of which would become staple features in their towns and cities, surviving through conquerships, battles, and dark ages all the way to modern times, where they remain protected by organizations such as UNESCO. Their architecture would go on to greatly influence the Roman world and the foundation for classical architecture, which would dominate the Western world from Renaissance to present day. Here's a cute little cultural nugget: the Martis. Spring has come! The name of March derives from this ancient tradition which dates back to the cult of Demeter and Persephone. As a form of initiation to the cult, the Usilians, the faithful wore a bracelet called a croaky on both their right hand and left ankle. Amazingly, the tradition still lives on today in modern Greece to celebrate springtime coming. Everyone, regardless of age, adorns themselves with the bracelet. However, there are certain rules that one must abide when creating and wearing the symbolic bracelet. It must be woven on the last day of February, worn from March 1st until the last day of the month, March 31st, and it must be made of white and red thread, the white symbolizing purity, the red symbolizing life and passion. In ancient times, people believed that the bracelet helped protect the person who was wearing it from diseases, as well as the strong rays of the spring sun during the month of March. Part of the ancient Greek tradition calls for the person wearing their red and white Martis bracelet to take it off and tie it to the first flowering tree they see in March in order to yield a healthy harvest. Another lovely tradition that the Greeks practice is that when they see the first swallow of spring, the first person who sees the swallow upon the bird's return from the winter migration ties their bracelet around the nearest rose bush to encourage the bird to make a nest there. And I can't bring up the Usilians without diving into ancient Greece cult culture. These ancient mysterious cults were based on sacred stories that often involved ritual worshipping of a death rebirth myth of a particular divinity. In addition to the promise of a better afterlife, these small sect groups fostered social bonds among the participants. Hilariously, like today, initiation fees and other contributions additions were also expected to the cult. I love it. Mystery cults continue to vex scholars because the evidence is minimal, comprising of a few written sources, mostly later in date, and often with questionable aims and biases. Cults like the Sabazios, which originated with the Philgarians and the Thraticans, were also known in Greece by the 5th century BCE, but they have no surviving stories, only brief historical references saying that his initiatives practiced ritual serpent handling. Dionysus's cult believed in primitive power accessible through wine's ability to lower inhibitions. We know his cult rituals were usually drunken group romps, the playing of bull roarers, and the sacrifice of animals using a double-headed axe, followed by the drinking of their blood mixed with wine. The Dionysians eventually evolved into the Orphics, which were established around the 5th century BCE. And what do cults, gods, and the everyday citizen have in common? They love a good raging festival. The ancient Greeks had hundreds of festivals that were celebrated in various regions throughout Greece and during different periods of their history. Festivals were thrown at any given opportunity, seeing as they had many exuberant emperors and a pantheon of demanding gods. They were pretty frequent, but not all were made equal. The Adonia was a festival that took place in the middle of summer exclusively by women. They would climb up on ladders on the roof of their houses, plant fast-growing plants like lettuce or fennel, and then leave these gardens in the hot sun so plants would sprout and wither immediately, symbolizing the life of Adonis, cut short. Then they would make a spectacular display of mourning by screaming, beating their chests, tearing their clothes off, while hurling an effigy of Adonis and all the dead plants into the sea. The Erephoria was an ancient Greek festival that was celebrated in Athens during the 5th century BC. Two young Athenian girls are selected to carry special object-filled baskets on their head down a natural underground passage leading from the temple of Athena Polias to the shrine of Aphrodite. They would leave the baskets there without looking at them, receive another set of mysterious objects in baskets, carry those bad boys back, and give the mystery baskets to the priestess of Athena. According to Pausanias, no one was allowed to know what was in the basket, no one ever looked, even the priestess had no idea. Obviously, ancient Greece has shown itself to be a culture of wonkiness, ingenuity, creativity, and our last point, intellectual risk takers. Ancient Greek technology developed during the 5th century BC, continuing up and including the Roman period and beyond. Inventions that were credited to the ancient Greeks include the gear, screw, rotary mill, bronze casting techniques, and the use of steam to operate some experimental machines and toys. Oh, and a chart to find prime numbers. Many of these inventions occurred in the later Greek period, often inspired by the need to improve weapons and tactics in warfare. Geometry is without a doubt one of the oldest branches of mathematics. However, the Greeks were the first to insist that geometric facts must be established by deductive reasoning. Thales of Miletus, regarded as the father of geometry, set up a number of axioms and rules in the 6th century BCE. Their approach to philosophy was a way of understanding the world around them without resorting to religion, myth, or magic, and it changed how we viewed the world. Early Greek philosophers were also scientists who observed and studied everything known, its seas, the mountains, as well as the solar system, planetary motion, and astral phenomena. Aristotle gave us the idea that Earth was a globe. He also classified animals and is referred to the father of zoology. Theophrastus was the first known botanist we know of written in history, and the Pythagoreans not only made the earliest advancements in philosophy and geometry, but they proposed the heliocentric hypothesis with Earth revolving around the sun. Suffice to say, the most fed culture of ancient Greece was that of the mind. Number 10, it's Happy Name Day to you. Birthdays are basic and boring. Here in ancient Greece, we practice name days, a celebration of your birth title. In ancient Greece, names were deemed incredibly important and were given in a way meant to ideally define what a person would be like and grow to be. A great example is Aristotle, a compound name with Aristos meaning best and telos meaning end. Pretty fitting and ironic for someone who would become the best philosopher of the time and also have a pretty not great end. Anyways, this importance of names meant that every name had its own special day in the calendar. So instead of celebrating your exit of the womb, you'd wait for whatever day was your given one and coincided with your name, and that's what you'd celebrate. Name days aren't just in Greek culture and can be found in ones such as Eastern Europe and the Balkan regions, and some still celebrate name day to this day. Some of us still get phone calls from angry aunts wondering why they weren't wished happy name day on Facebook. Since it rhymes with wine, number 9 is water it down. We know that many ancient civilizations didn't drink water due to how polluted it was. Whether that pollution was salt or feces, well, it varied. Anyways, while many drank beer, the Greeks drank wine. However, drinking alcohol at every time of the day doesn't mean that there's a free pass to be drunk. Quite the opposite actually, as heavy drinking and drunkenness was looked down upon and seen as an embarrassment. This is because the Greeks associated it with barbarism, and many of their gods and their pantheons' behaviors and stories also attributed to this. Wine without water was only used as medicine for sick or during travel as a tonic. As a result, the Greeks may have been pounding back the wine, wine, but it was water diluted ratio, so the standard was 1:4. They even had a special container for mixing, boiling, and then cooling this diluted mixture. Oh, and by the way, it was seawater they were using, because apparently, to quote, seawater gives the wine a curious salinity which mixes with the sweetness of the grape and produces a delicate taste, while at the same time preserving the wine for longer. Number 8 is He Who Must Not Be Named. This is one of the pettiest and most specific ones you'll probably ever hear, and it's all because one dude screwed up so phenomenally it started an actual tradition. So what happened here was there was this Greek shepherd named Erostratus, and this guy had an idea one day to, set fire to and destroy the temple of Artemis in Ephesus. So keep in mind, he did this in an era where the Greeks revered their gods the way that modern day religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, etc. do. These gods are real to them, so why would they destroy her temple? Which, by the way, is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world in our modern time. When pissed off Greeks came and found him to ask that same question, Erostratus essentially said his only intention in doing this was to achieve fame and his name to go on into history, the way that Alexander or Achilles had. He didn't care if it was in a good or a bad way, he just wanted that. Well, the entirety of Greece collectively said F that. Once his intentions were revealed, mentioning his name or naming children Erostratus was forbidden at the risk of being sentenced to death penalty. And so it became tradition that no one in Greece was to have that name. Number 7 is Don't Open Dead Outside. In traditional Grecian lore, it was said that there was these walking dead as creatures. Legend forewarns that these creatures would rise from the graves at night to knock on the door of innocent civilians, saying their names repetitively as a lure to open up, as these creatures, kinda in a vampire fashion, have to be invited in. If you didn't answer your door on the first knock, you were safe and no harm could come to you. However, if people were unfortunate enough to answer, they would die after a few days and then would be transformed into one of these creatures themselves. This is why the Greeks had a tradition, arguably even a superstition, that you should never answer the door on the first knock. Many still follow this tradition to date. Number 6, you don't want to be the bigger man. We've all seen the Grecian statues, whether in photo format or lucky enough to see them in galleries or in the country it's themselves. But what we can all agree on is there's one added appendage that's hard to avoid noticing. Or is it? You may have noticed on male statues from ancient Greece that while they include his private regions, they are noticeably quite, small on every single statue. Well, this is a tradition that actually has an explanation that's nothing to do with shrinkage. In ancient Greece, a small package was actually coveted and seen as the pinnacle of male form. This is because it was consistently depicted in their lore that being well endowed was something for the mundane or barbarians. So traditionally in ancient lore, only foolish males ruled by lust had large, you get the idea. Finally, an explanation for the question we've all thought, nobody said out loud.
Number 5, wine time. When we think of ancient Greeks, we think of wine and parties and apparently naked exercise, right? But was it really a drunken festival of love all the time? I mean, hangovers are a thing, right? We need some recovery days. When did Gatorade get invented? I don't know, it's probably hard to keep up. Ancient Greeks actually rarely drank wine without diluting the hell out of it first. To water the wine, the ratio was 4:1 or 5:2. Either way, it's just water at that point. So you'll be hydrated, that's for sure, which is great, but you're not really getting drunk, so I don't know what the point was. Regular Joes would drink at taverns and the rich would throw house parties, so some things, of course, have stayed the same after all these years, but ancient Greeks believed that drinking undiluted wine could cause blindness or insanity. My friend, I think that's just called blacking out. I don't know, who knows? If you did happen to drink too much wine, the 4th century poet Amphis, he's got your back. Best way to cure those ancient hangovers was to boil some cabbage. Nice, just what you want to smell after a night out. And in order to keep the party going without embarrassing yourself off some sparkling Shiraz, the best way to party and stay sober was to bake and eat a pig's lung. That's the trick to never getting drunk in ancient Greek times. Again though, I think that was just eating food. I think eating food helps before you drink. Either way, if you're gonna drink, do so responsibly. Eat some pig lung and then you'll be good. Number 4, bronze bull. On a list of unusual things ancient Greeks did, I think it's fair to throw in the bronze or the brazen bull. There is a bronze sculpture, often in the shape of a bull. Yeah, obviously. Usually it was large enough to fit a person inside. Yeah, I think I saw this in a Saw movie one time. That's how you know it's good. Once the person was locked inside, a fire would then be set underneath this bronze bull, and then you can probably figure out the rest of that situation and what happens to the victim inside. We'll say victim inside, not person. Victim. Horribly, painfully. It's all bad. They engineered the bull so that when somebody screamed inside, it sounded like a bull's roar. That's haunting. That's actually really horrible. Every time I talk about this, I'm like, this is real life. Real people did this. It was designed originally for Phalaris. He was a horrible ruler. He ruled around 560 BC, but the sculpture for Phalaris was built by Perillus, the guy who made the brazen bull. He was sadly the first victim. That's why you don't make torture devices. I don't know. Number 3, Greek statues. Okay, I'll lighten up the mood a little bit. The last one was a bit dark. We've all done this at one point. Maybe you're at a museum and you see a statue. It's right there in front of you. It's carved. It's pure beauty. It's massive. The warrior represented has like 15 abs. It's made of bronze, 8 feet tall. The amount of detail gone into their body is jaw-dropping. Truly, it's impressive. But did you know that ancient Greeks would make their bird small on purpose? On purpose. Yeah, men who were well endowed were more often than not fools. They were foolish. They only ruled for lust, right? They were just craved fools with big birds. If you had a big brain, however, you were the talk of the town. Ladies would whisper about you when you passed by in the street. Did you hear about Brian's big brain? Oh my god. He's got his dad's brain. Whenever an actor would play a fool on stage, they would be given a comedically large setup, you know? That's how you know he's the villain or the fool, the bad guy in the scenario. The way we see these statues today meant that they had self-control and intelligence. I always thought they were just in a cold room when they were getting their stuff carved, but that's what this channel's for. History, but make it a little silly. Number 2, the Battle of Marathon. Every New Year's, there's always that one guy on Facebook or Instagram who just becomes a runner just overnight. They have a little squirt water belt thing that they shoot it, the whole thing, the whole setup, and they train ideally for a marathon. That's the big thing that they talk about for an entire year, this marathon. What is a marathon? Was it a person, or is it just a name for 42 kilometers? Well, it was actually a battle back in 490 BC. That's how it kicked off. Between ancient Greeks and Persian invaders sent by King Darius, the Persians arrived to Marathon. There's about 20,000 of them, and they arrived to punish the Greeks for supporting the Ionians, who revolted against the Persians. Now, the Greeks were outnumbered here at this point, but they attacked hard and they attacked fast. They took out 6,000 Persians, and eventually they just fled the scene entirely. The number of Greek fighters lost was around 200, so far less casualties. The story of Philippides came to be at this time. He ran the first ever marathon. He ran all the way from Marathon to Athens to deliver messages, because BlackBerry wasn't a thing, obviously, so some guys had to be like, you bet. Imagine servers back then, they're like, would you want a large soda? You got. He was one of the Greek military men known as day-long runners. He did 6 marathons back to back. My knees hurt just saying that, you know what I mean? So next time you see somebody on Facebook become a marathon runner, just post a link to this video and be like, you got it. You're almost, just do 6 in a row and you're good. Also do 6 in a row naked in the heat and you're good. And finally, number 1, human sacrifice. Of course, we gotta end on something crazy like this. We found the remains of a 3,000-year-old skeleton in Greece. And they found the skeleton on the side of Mount Lycaon, which historians know as the site of animal sacrifice for Zeus. I don't know why I pointed up, but probably not down, or yeah, Zeus, he's up there, yeah. Ancient writers mentioned this site and how human sacrifice was also at play here. And now, thanks to technology, we can confirm that this was for sure the case. We talked about zombies earlier and how bodies would be buried with like rocks in them and stuff. This is a bit different. This is actually much different. The upper part of the skull that was found was missing, first of all, and the body was laid on 2 lines of stones, with stone slabs just laid on their pelvis. Now, Greece, of course, is the birthplace of philosophy and democracy and all that good stuff, but they also did some sacrificial, shady stuff in their off time as well when they weren't slamming watered down Merlot. Science allowed us to look all over the world too, not just Greece. There's ancient Egyptians, Aztecs, sometimes after Mayan ball games, the losing team would be sacrificed. Yeah, that's pretty brutal. Everyone talks about how awful humans are now. Well, we've always been the worst. The Greeks just like to party while they were doing it.
Number 10, Tyrants. This is where the name comes from, folks, so we kind of wouldn't have the label if it weren't for ancient Greeks. There's been a lot of tyrants in history, but this is where it all starts. A tyrant refers to an absolute leader who uses his or her power harshly and crudely, exercising total control and oppressing those who stand against the strict rulings or are a desired target of which. Ooh, very fancy definition, Chetty. I like it. Wow. The trick is seeing how history remembers you. Leaders like Pol Pot and Joseph Stalin are easily agreeable tyrants, but for example, the ancient Greek leader Alexander the Great can also be considered one. History remembers him for his great triumphs, and while that's interesting to look at because, well, he's one of history's greatest generals, he's really amazing actually. From the safety of our history class, that's fine, but his actual deeds, well, they were less than remarkable. War, looting, trading, YouTube's least favorite S word, and well, many more brutal things that the conqueror from another land did. Not good. Plus, if you were from another land and you saw him do what he was doing, you probably wouldn't think he was such a great guy. It wouldn't be Alexander the Great, it'd be Alexander the Big Stinky Tyrant. So, there you go. Number 9, Diogenes. This one's my favorite. Maybe the least famous of all philosophers, but one with a decent philosophy, or at least so I think so. That's how I feel, and I think it fits in with the modern world. A man who was banished and exiled and had all his possessions stripped away. In some depictions, even his clothes. I wouldn't want that taken away. I gotta have my clothes. Thus, the man was forced to live his life on the streets of Athens, inside a barrel, as you do. This likely is what developed his philosophy of cynicism. He argued that since he was living free of tax or payment in his barrel, that he was truly free. Thus, he had less worries than the commoners, and yeah, that's where his freedom came from. Well, where does the crime part come in? Besides, well, the obvious tax fraud there, and we're gonna pay your taxes. Diogenes might have been a few gyros short of a picnic, if you know what I'm saying, as he would often shout at passers-by, and well, he would do the devil's bedroom dance solo in public, just in his barrel there, just doing, yeah, I can't say it, but you know what I'm talking about. Number 8, Sith revenge. Well, I know a lot of people would be behind this, especially for really awful crimes. Revenge is not the Jedi way. Sometimes it was an option for the families of those who were wronged in ancient Greece to enact their revenge on the crook, assuming of course the crook was caught. You can just imagine the kind of crimes, the really bad ones. YouTube won't let me say. However, the important point here is that the families of the victim were given a chance to make their peace, or well, whatever the antithesis of that is, usually involving the crook not breathing anymore. Kind of a blood for blood kind of thing. Sounds great at first, but I couldn't recommend it. I don't think it would go well in people's conscience. I don't know, not a good idea. Number 7, exile. A classic of the old world. Just like Hellenic society itself, a common punishment for a severe enough crime was banishment. Sure, today there's lots of folks who like being alone. I swear most of the people I went to high school with were introverts. I was friends with all of them. I don't know why though, because I'm so extroverted. For example, Heraclitus of Ephesus. He was getting banished from ancient Greece, and it's a lot different than not being invited to Chad's birthday party. However, getting banished back then could likely see you with nothing, like previously mentioned before. Maybe not as bad or down bad as previously mentioned, like Diogenes, but still pretty rough. There were lots wrong with ancient cities, sure, but you were much safer in civilization than left outside of it back then. As someone who's seen a lot of Bear Grylls, I wouldn't recommend going out of the wild back then. A trip, fall, a cut, that's it. Whew. Number 6, the Brazen Bull. This one is a punishment and a crime. 2 in 1, baby. The Brazen Bull to many may just look like a statue, and worst case Ontario, maybe the horns are sharp and could hurt you. Maybe. But don't be fooled, friends. This is much more than a statue of bronze or brass colored bull. It's actually a perp cooker. It's a twisted, awful, rotten form of punishment that could also be a crime itself. One against humanity, and those are the worst ones. Basically, you open the hatch on the bull and throw your bad guy in. Then, get a nice big fire going, really big one. The same ones your dad does in the summer. You know the ones that you can't even get too close to because it's too hot. Woo! Then, wait. Once steam or whatever horrible smelling vapors come through the bull's nose, that's when you know the perp is done and it's time to throw in another one. That's awful. What an awful way to go. Oh.
And while on the subject of their miraculous medicine, how about a medical mystery we may never solve? Were they colorblind? Interesting, I know. I hope I got your attention with this one because even I looked twice when I found the journal article on this. So this theory comes from a few historical sources and some historian opinions. According to Mark Bradley, associate professor of ancient history at the University of Nottingham, color operated in a very different way in history from what we use today. According to him, the Greeks viewed color essentially as the visible outmost shell of an object. So fire wouldn't be red, it was fire colored. Dirt wouldn't be brown, it'd be dirt colored. The sky would be sky colored. Skin would be skin colored. They wouldn't talk in the terms of abstract color labels like blue, mauve, chartreuse that we use today. This explains why conversations of ethnicity don't show up much in ancient Greece. That's some context for you. Anyways, a great example is how Homer, in his famous works like the Iliad and the Odyssey, described the Mediterranean Sea as a wine-dark sea. Have you ever looked at the ocean and thought, ah yes, grape juice? Homer actually only names a few color terms and uses the same colors to describe objects that look quite different, such as comparing the color of a seagull to that of a bush. Two very different things. So if this theory is true, it would really suck to see the world in a little bit less color than we do now. Another mystery, but one to fear, would be the unknown plagues. Anyone who happened to be living in Athens in 430 BC had about a 25% chance of dying in a horrible, horrible way, and historians aren't really sure exactly what happened. So the basics are, it was during the Peloponnesian War, and Athens was under siege when an illness broke out. It's assumed the illness was brought by invading soldiers in their blood or in their mucus. It's very 2020 pandemic style. It lasted for around 5 years, and the death toll was catastrophic on top of the war. Most of what historians know about the plague comes from the writings of Athenian general Thucydides, and what he described isn't anything clearly recognizable as one particular plague or illness, rather a combination of symptoms of multiple deadly illnesses like smallpox or typhus. Victims suffered from fevers, bloody and swollen throats and tongues, and finally violent excrement that drained the last of the life out of them. In 2006, a study where DNA was collected from the teeth of ancient Athenians swiftly buried in mass graves suggests it was typhoid fever, but not everyone's convinced. Another recent suggestion was an outbreak of Ebola. Whatever it was though, it killed a lot of people in a really bad way, and this was just one of the plagues that hit Greece. This was the only mysterious one, however. Here's an annoying one that would make things suck 2 times a day. Imagine asking for the time and someone replying, which one? Well, aside from those who randomly have their cell phones set to 24-hour clock, this scenario usually doesn't happen, but it did in ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks had 2 different concepts of time, using 2 different words, chronos and kairos. The former refers to time as we know it and measure it today, the chronological time. The latter signifies proper or opportune time for action. In other words, the right time to do something. In contrast to chronos, which is quantitative, kairos has a qualitative nature. Where there's a time, there's a place. Ancient Carthaginians thought kairos to be one of the most fundamental laws in the universe. In Aristotle's scheme of rhetoric, kairos plays a very important role, as for him kairos is the time and space context in which proof will be delivered. One watch on each wrist, ladies and gentlemen, because one will tell you it's 4 p.m. and the other will tell you it's time to dump your girlfriend. And by checking your time for action watch, you may know if it's time to get pluck-ins. As you can probably guess from looking at the statues and other works of art they left behind, the ancient Greeks weren't a fan of bodily hair. To be smooth was to be the epitome of beauty, but whoever went for a wax in ancient Greece would have been in for a rough ride. There wasn't waxing solutions or razors. You sat there and plucked out every hair on your body one at a time. You could always burn your body hair off, that was a popular option, but I mean, you have your risks with that. Now strangely, less is more didn't apply to eyebrows, where people were trying to grow a literal bush. Monobrows were a highly desirable look to be prized or envied, so makeup and fake hairs were applied. Meanwhile for men, the smooth thing still goes with exception to beards, which were a prestige symbol for men. Their grooming was of the utmost importance and also subject to competition between men, as all things somehow managed to be, which made the good hairdressers very sought after. Hear that? The bro bond between a guy and his barber? Ancient concept. So yes, while hair was considered by them to be the most valuable part of a human body that could be produced, and it gave the dead the power of their journey to the underworld, on the other hand, losing hair for ancient Greeks was not a negative thing. It was even their indication of wisdom, this being the reason most statues depicting philosophers are bald. And last but not least is Creighton's creation. I'm about to talk about something without talking about it. So, what did the Creightons create? A form of widely accepted and acknowledged kidnap, which then later evolved to become a consensual release by the father of a young man from his father's household to an of-age man who would be his guide to adulthood. In the Hellenistic world, it was accepted, hell, expected. It was always up to the older man to do the pursuing, and this is where the rooster comes in. Upon seeing the young man he'd like to guide, he would present him with a live rooster. In Greek society, this would have been seen as a gift hard to turn down, so few young men did, and so began the relationship. Think of the other name for a rooster, so this is kind of a really metaphorical gift. Anyways, traditionally, they would go out into the wilderness together so the young man may learn hunting, fishing, navigation, foraging, plant identification, and pore over poetry and literature. Later, the young man and his guide would return back to their home city with the young man as a comrade to the man now, living with him in the city to learn manly responsibilities there instead of the back 40s. But of course, such relationships couldn't last. It was customary for the man to release his young companion as soon as the latter started to grow facial hair, which genetically is different for everyone, so some men got away easier than others. The young man could then either continue his relation with the guide or publicly denounce him for any misbehaviors that occurred during their time together, which might might as well be the barest minimum punishment for an SA to have ever existed in human history, which is why it easily tops the lists of reasons why living in ancient Greece would have been impossible. Fresh out of the oven, we are starting with literature and theater. It wasn't until around 670 BCE that Homer's epics, the Iliad and Odyssey, were finally written in text. Written literature wasn't an option prior to the time of Plato, so all story surviving was told verbally. Spoken literature and theater became naturally intertwined. Together, they presented fictional stories, real history, melodramas, whether on stage or from a grandparent's mouth. Greek theater began in the 6th century BCE in Athens with the performance of tragedy plays at religious festivals. These in turn inspired the genre of Greek comedy plays, and the two both became hugely popular to attend, and performances spread around the Mediterranean. They influenced Hellenistic and Roman theater as well. The works of playwrights like Sophocles and Aristophanes formed the foundation upon which modern theater is based. Meanwhile, it may seem like dialogue was always a part of literature, but it wasn't before a dude named Aeschylus introduced the groundbreaking revolutionary idea of characters maybe interacting with each other. Other theatrical devices like sarcasm were integrated in works of Sophocles' Oedipus the King. And speaking of stories and oral traditions, lessons learned teaching through story. Ancient Greece used stories of gods, goddesses, and their demigod children and the first of mankind as ways to subtly, or not so subtly, teach behavior, consequences, and ideally self-preservation. Being a mythopoetic culture, they transmitted most story through poetry. As mentioned previously, for a long time, if the everyday Greek person was to learn about anything, it would need to be through hearsay. Thus, stories bearing the most important lessons on cowardice, betrayal, war, and heresy were the most popular because they were the most memorable. The gods and goddesses acted as examples, paradigms, and models for good behavior. Obviously, this is super contradicting because 90% of their gods functioned off of bad behavior, such as disgraceful killings, theft, lying, harming others, abductions. But the playwrights, orators, and poets were encouraging the audiences to reflect upon the tales and consider the values and morality within them. The function of these myths, as most cultures, is to explain, unify, and order existence and experience. The myths dispel chaos. When faced with a conflict, the Greeks sought answers in these stories that they had heard and used as guides through life. They reveal a structure, order, and coherence, and meaning not otherwise evident without forcing one to reflect. Bam! Break that revelry. It ain't all poetic. Infidelity culture. Infidelity was a crime highly scandalized according to ancient Greek customs. So, for both men and women who were accused and found guilty, there were punishments that put folks through the ringer. Ancient Athenian law had a set of 3 laws, the Miochia. The first of these prohibited a man from living with an adulterous wife and an adulterous wife from taking part in public religious ceremonies. The second exempted a man who had killed his wife or partner caught in the act. And the third protected an accused male adulterer from illegal imprisonment or death, but only if the woman he had slept with was a working girl. Ancient Greece was super for the boys. But yeah, you could go to jail, get stoned, be exiled. A classic was also having a peeled ginger root or radish shoved up your nether orifices, causing an intolerable burning sensation and agony. If it was enforced as capital punishment, the ginger radish chosen would be dry, rough, and lumpy so as to cause death by internal hemorrhaging. Fun! But before infidelity, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes krivati, which will make you need a baby carriage. Why? Because when directly translated, krivati literally means the bed. And if you don't already know about this tradition, you may want to consider adding it to your wedding festivities, Grecian background or otherwise. It's a Greek wedding tradition where friends and family of the bride and groom take time to decorate the marital bed. The tradition going back to ancient Greece dictates that single women should be doing this, but these days anyone's welcome to participate. The first stage is making the bed. In ancient times they quite literally built them a bed. Then they set up the bed with linens, bedspreads, pillowcases, and some simple set decorations such as throw pillows and flowers. At this stage the husband-to-be is called in to approve the bed. Once he does, more elaborate decorations are added. These ones are symbolic and intimate tokens, chosen to bless the marriage with luck, prosperity, love, and fertility. Rice is thrown on the bed to symbolize the process of putting down roots, and after people decorate the bed with any other festive elements like rose petals, jewels, and glitter. And since this cultural practice also felt a little ritually, let's expand on those with godly sacrifices. Sacrifices were an ancient Greek custom that signified the solidarity and the communion between humanity and divinity. As the gods had once sacrificed for us, we now bestow that back onto them. However, the act of sacrificing demonstrates the difference between the natural world and the divine world. The sacrifice or offering was the heart of the ritual, the center of the whole process by ancient Greek customs. Sacrifices would be offered individually or by a group group or community, and they were made in different places or sacred temples. To sacrifice as an individual is not so different from going to a church confessional. It's usually done as a plea for aid, comfort, and understanding, and this is simply how you were able to grab your gods' attention. Obviously, a lot harder than just closing the door and sitting down on a kneeler, so cut them some slack. Community sacrifice was usually done in sanctuaries, with priests doing the sacrificing alongside a prayer and a hymn. The animals that were sacrificed could be goats, lambs, pigs, chickens, and the latter being more of a modest offering, or it could be an ox, which was the most prestigious.
Number 5, athlete juice. Speaking of gross, this one is straight out of Johnny Knoxville's playbook. Shout out to those guys. I hope one day I'm cool enough and famous enough to meet them. Maybe do a bit. Chetty's not gonna fut, so I'm down. Anyway, back to the Greeks. Remember when I said the Greek bodybuilders like to oil up? Well, so did the athletes. Here's where it gets gross. After days of events and running around in the dirt, naked with olive oil, these athletes wouldn't always bathe. But why? Well, the answer is marketing. Just like Gatorade commercials of the early 2000s, these athletes were covered in juice. This sludge was scraped off in what I'm sure was a very humanizing experience and jarred up to be sold like a superhero serum for the average Joe Schmo to drink or rub on themselves. This mixture was called Gloios. No thank you. I will pass. Number 4, Nocturne Totem. It was 2008. I was alone in the dark one summer night. There, illuminating my poor innocent face, was Call of Duty World at War, the latest action-packed Hollywood blockbuster FPS from Activision. Now, I always finish campaigns first before moving on to multiplayer. Just when I thought it was over, a new cutscene started playing, except this one was different. It was dark, and the camera was shaky, and that's when I saw them, twisted and screeching undead, sprinting at me. I have never turned off a console so fast in all my life. Well, it seems the ancient Greeks shared this fear as well. To prevent zombies eating their very smart brains, the Greeks oftentimes buried folks with heavy stuff on top of them, just to prevent them from climbing out of their graves. That's the smartest people on earth, and they think the zombies are gonna come get them. That's crazy. That's guys, come on. Number 3, diluted wine. The Greeks were well known for their artisan goods and foods. Their wine is no different. Some good stuff out there. However, did you know that Greeks would dilute their wine with a little H2O? Drinking wine pure was sometimes considered to be an unholy act, as it was said it could make a man unruly. Well, they're not too far off from the truth on that one, actually. Drinking too much wine can make you go a little silly. So yeah, diluting it kinda makes sense. Sometimes during hot weather, if it was available, snow was added for a cool and refreshing drink on the hot Greek island days. It sounds kind of nice, kind of like an ice spritzer, a Greek ice wine spritzer. How nice, wow. Number 2, the finger. The ultimate hand gesture. I know you're gonna have to blur it out or not even put it in, but here we go, that's what I'm talking about. The ultimate hand gesture. It starts with a, hey, I'm walking here, and ends with a simple finger in the air. It's been used for centuries and will probably be used for many more. Ever wondered where the origins of the most powerful hand gesture besides Darth Vader's force choke come from? Well, the almighty gesture has its origins in ancient Greece. Who would have thought? While no one is 100% sure the exact origins of it, we know it was used back then and it was around. The very interesting Diogenes was known to use it against those passing by he was distasteful of. He didn't like a lot of people. Maybe it was because it was simple, phallic, or just kind of strange. But at the end of the day, we all know what it means. Number 1, mud bath. I know Steve-O has literally done something like this before, and if there's rules you should write down, write this one very down, this second, right now, write it down. Be kind to be kind to one another, and work hard in life. And never do anything ever that Steve-O has ever done. Those are really good rules. Trust me, it's good words to live by. So what exactly am I talking about? Well, in ancient Greece, for those who could afford it and had the time, they needed to relax. I need to relax. They needed the spa treatment. Heck, I've never even been to a spa. Someone take me. The ancient Greeks loved mud baths, and from what I hear, it's actually got quite a lot of benefits to it. However, the Greeks added one secret ingredient. One piece of the Krabby Patty formula I know most of us would say no to, even Plankton. Crocodile dung. Oh god. Yes, that's right. They bathed in hot crocodile refuse. It's great for the skin, apparently. So much so that it was thought it had beautifying and restorative properties. Go ahead then. Jump right in, guys. Water's fine. Come on in.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the bird. The bird is not the word. It's actually pretty offensive. To flip somebody the bird or to flip somebody off, of course, means to give them the middle finger. What are these little troublesome guys right here? One of these blurry dudes right here. Do we even know why we do this? I mean, I don't recommend it because obviously you'll get in a heap of trouble from whoever's on the other end, the receiving end of said finger. But giving somebody the middle finger comes from the 4th century BC in Athens. The philosopher Diogenes expressed how he felt visitors about Demosthenes. He described him by making a, well, you guessed it, a middle finger. It's a phallic gesture. The middle finger is supposed to be your, your bird, for lack of a better term, and the surrounding curled fingers are meant to be the other things that are around said thing on the body. I'm trying not to say what I really want to say here, but the bird is meant to, it's supposed to be one of those. The more you know. Ancient Greek history. Who would have thunk? Number 9. Column Wars. While the Greeks were going head to head with the Turks, they were fighting over their independence, of course, and the Greeks had the upper hand at Acropolis one day. They were surrounding their enemy and they had this stronghold in their grasp, and the Turks at the same time were running out of ammo and options. They then began to break apart the marble columns around them, just smashing them to pieces, just breaking them as fast as they can to try and get lead from inside and use that as ammo. Now, as the Greeks witnessed the destruction of their Parthenon, they panicked, obviously. They said, here, just take ammo instead. Whatever you do, just don't break those columns. We can keep fighting. In fact, we'll supply you the ammunition, just don't break those columns. And they did. The 1821 Greek War of Independence. Here you go, Ottoman Empire, take this lead. Now we can fight, let's do it. It's like when you're at a house party, they're like, just fight each other, just don't put a hole in the wall. I'll be grounded. Seriously, I can't fix that. I don't know how to. Number 8, zombies. It doesn't matter what the context is, zombies are always scary. Whenever we talk about ancient Egyptians, we break down the process of mummification. And you know what? I'll be honest, I missed that part. Just keep everything in jars, keep everything separate in different rooms, keep everything safe, surrounded by treasure in the middle of a tomb. No zombie is coming back to life if that's the case. You know what I mean? Well, ancient Greeks actually believed in zombies as well. They had steps they would take to prevent the dead from ever walking again. Archaeologists found graves where bodies were weighed down with rocks, or they would be pinned to their tombs. One of the two. Both pretty horrible. They weren't called zombies, of course, but rather revenants. Reanimated corpses that return to terrorize the living, aka zombies. It's a zombie. Dr. Solowski Weaver explains that bodies found at a cemetery near the ancient town of Camarina in southeast Sicily were feared to come back to life at one point. The town was once a Greek colony, of course now modern day Italy, but it's home to a 3rd century cemetery with around 3,000 bodies in there. There's more than half of them that are buried with coins, the usual, but a few of them were found in specific ways, peculiar ways. One body, found in tomb 653, their body was covered in large fragments of amphora. So it's whatever was underneath there, they didn't want that to move. Which is weird, because you're like, okay, I know that they're dead. Why are we putting a rock on them? You know, that fear, we still have it today. Number 7, stone cold. When the pandemic first began, one of the hardest things to get a hold of, surprisingly, was toilet paper. Yeah, it's pretty important. It's more important than we realized, because that was the thing on the news that we saw, people just boxing each other at a Walmart for toilet paper. When you run out of toilet paper, you often remember that moment regardless of where you are forever. Leaves of 3, let them be. That's all I'm saying. But ancient Greeks used these small ceramic pieces to wipe. Yeah, ceramic pieces, like sharp. French anthropologist Philippe Charlier expands on this toilet hygiene history in the British Medical Journal. It was these flat terracotta discs found in these ancient sites, and they had residue on them, so the proof's in the pudding. They also discovered a Greek cup which said 3 stones are enough to wipe one's arse. 3 stones. See, even today, it's like 3 pieces, 3 slices, 3 stones. It's always 3. Yeah, Greeks would use pebbles to wipe their butts. Never take the go for granted, ever again. Number 6, naked exercise. Okay, this one, honestly, I'm just saying it's unusual, but I'm on board with it. You ever forget a towel when you're showering? You gotta do that weird, naked, silly run through the hallway. I'll be honest with you guys, that's my favorite run. I feel like one of those aliens from Signs, just walking around all light, naked, and lanky. Just meant for speed, meant for greatness. Just wet, just like a lizard just slipping around all over the kitchen. Ancient Greeks used to work out naked. The word gymnasium translates to the Greek term gymnasion, which meant school for naked exercise. Yeah, growing up, I always wanted to go to Xavier's school for gifted youngsters. Now, I just want to go to Ezekiel's school for naked exercise. Just don't set up shop behind the guy working on his squats. That's probably a bad idea. You know what? The more I think of this, the more I convince myself it's a pretty terrible idea. Hey man, do you mind spotting me? Sure.
At number 5, Democracy? Though the Greeks are often credited with the creation of democracy, much like anything else in this world, it has a dark history, one of injustice and bloodshed. Back in the days of ancient Greece and in the relatively early days of democracy, this political practice could sometimes be used for nefarious purposes. One of the best examples of that comes from the Mytilenean debate of 427 BC. Basically what happened here is that during the Peloponnesian War, the city-state of Mytilene tried to free itself from the influence of Athens. Their revolt ultimately failed, and the citizens of the city-state were subjected to a severe punishment. They decided to not only execute the prisoners that they'd taken to Athens, but also the entire adult male population, and women and children were sold into slavery. The vote to put a stop to Mytilene weighed heavily on the minds of those who voted for this outcome, so they later staged another vote, ultimately choosing to only punish those who were directly involved in the city's revolt. At number 4, crime and punishment. Earlier I mentioned one of the gruesome ways that people were punished in ancient Greece, but let me tell you some more about their ways of crime and punishment. The standard form of executing prisoners was by performing what was called a bloodless crucifixion. Basically, the convicted individual would, quote, be fastened to a board by the wrists and ankles, and a collar around the neck would be tightened gradually to strangle them to death. End quote. If an execution had to take place on a battlefield, the accused would be beheaded, but if given the option, you could sometimes avoid a violent death by instead choosing to ingest poison on your own terms. If you committed a crime and were able to avoid execution, then you would be exiled. If your crime was bad enough to be banished from your community, then your name and crime would be inscribed somewhere so that no one forgot what you did, meaning that your crime would be known for the rest of time. At number 3, this is Sparta. As you could imagine, childhood during ancient times was certainly no easy cakewalk, but one of the worst upbringings in ancient Greece had to go to the young citizens of Sparta. Just to give you an idea of how life might have been as a Spartan, just think about the fact that it was literally written into law that Spartans had to be, quote, fearless, ruthless, and disciplined above all else. End quote. Back then, a young Spartan boy would only grow up with his parents until he was 7 years old, which at this point he would then be sent to a military camp run by the state, where he would stay until he turned 30. Young Spartans were taught mostly about fighting, perfecting the art of combat, and would spend very little time learning math and music. These kids were taught to be ruthless, stealing for their survival, and not showing any fear towards their enemies. At number 2, ostracism. In Athens, back during ancient Greece, ostracism was a common aspect of political life. Back then, the citizens would evaluate the performance of their politicians. They would then vote on who didn't serve them well or who they didn't like, and the citizens would write the name of said person on a piece of broken pottery. The person who gained the most votes from the public would then be exiled from Athens for 10 years. Unfortunately, this was kind of a flawed system, and any clever politician would then be able to use this ostracism vote in order to get rid of their rival. After Athenians figured out the flaw in their system, their ostracism votes were later ended. And finally, at number 1, sacrifice. At this point, after learning about so many ancient civilizations, I think it's safe to assume that basically every civilization had their sacrifices. Human sacrifices, I mean. It's been theorized that perhaps the ancient Greeks were participating in such practices because back in 2016, the remains of a teenager were found on Mount Lycaon, which appeared to have been, quote, a product of ritual sacrifice, end quote. It is thought that perhaps this person was meant to serve as a sacrifice to the god Zeus. On top of that, there has also been pieces of ancient literature that depicts the sacrificing of individuals in the same area that those remains were found. We don't know for certain if this kind of ritual was part of everyday life or if it was just a one-off type deal.